stuff. And this is for you, just kind of jot this down and look at where you're at. What's your current age? Based on the chart, what do you need for $1 million? By the way, $1 million is not a whole heck of a lot of money. That would only give you between $40,000 and $50,000 a year in retirement, not necessarily living high in the hog there. Okay. And we'll talk about some of those implications in a Masterclass too. But what's the amount of money if you wait another 5 years? So 5 more years, how much more would it have to be? What can you cut out in your lifestyle now that can cause you to be able to save that now? And then think about how many people who could really use this information. How many people have no clue? They're the ones just going through life like minnows, spending money. They're just wandering generalities, not understanding what the implications are of their actions or inactions. And if they could understand some of these concepts and know this now, what a difference you can be and a blessing you can be in their life. So just to recap this section is how suckers think. I know savings is important, but now is just not a good time to deal with it. Versus here's the deal. Time is money. Every day counts. Building my financial future starts now. So I just want you to know that being disciplined with your money, and this, right? It's just like anything else. If you wanted to start a good workout habit, at first it's hard. You're sore. It's hard to motivate yourself sometimes to change your habit. But once you have a habit, then it doesn't take discipline anymore because you already have the habit. Now it's downloaded in that part of your brain that allows it to be very easy for you. Same thing with saving and investing money. And a lot of us, we always think about saving and investing as something that's a great idea for the future. It's a great idea once I pay off this credit card, or once I get my kids out of daycare, or once I pay out that car. That's always a future-based thinking. And when we're always saying it's a good idea to do in the future, guess what? The future never comes. So we have to deal with things, at least wealthy people, in the now. So let's go back to that analogy of the oak tree, right? If you were to have that oak tree be planted for you, when would have been the best time in your lifetime for it to be planted? Well, it would have been the day you were born. But for many of us, that never took place. Well, what if we could change that culture or change that conversation about having $1 million babies? So we're going to just dive into this for a minute before I bring up the last presenter, is having just the concept of a gift for the future and what this could do and change. Only 20% of children are going to have any kind of inheritance. That's 1 out of 5 people. Everyone else, 4 out of 5 people, are going to have to deal everything on their own. So maybe it's time we rethink how parents can, or grandparents for that matter, leave a legacy. So think about which legacy plan is more realistic for you, right? And by the way, we're advocates for legacy, right? That's Evolve Financial Partners. So this is very near and dear to our hearts as an organization. So option 1 is, and both these options are good, by the way, but option 1, leave your children $1 million inheritance from your personal savings. Well, that's a great goal, because that means you had $1 million left over after your own retirement, all your own needs for your kids to have, each $1 million. Okay, if you have 5 kids, well, that'd be $5 million. Or grow $1 million retirement for each child, starting with a small fraction of what that would be. Do it when they're young, when they're born. So either one could be great, again, but what's doable for most is probably option 2. So let's get into a little bit. All right. So here's some realities of why it's so difficult nowadays for parents to leave an inheritance. First of all, getting old is a new thing, right? 2/3 of everyone who's ever hit 65 in the history of the world is alive today. So we're not retiring at 65 and dying at 67 anymore. We're living into our 90s. So we have a long life. Inflation, everything gets more expensive in retirement. So it means we're going to need more money in retirement. So a lot of people, seniors, they're going to be using that inheritance. And then medical bills, the medical the healthcare industry, how expensive it is, just I mean, if you looked at what just Medicare costs are, and just healthcare alone, and what that kind of implication, we know that's a very unfunded liability from Uncle Sam. So a lot of seniors are stuck with that price tag. And then finally, 70% of people over 65 years old are going to need some kind of long-term care. And so I personally have gone through that. My father, back in 2014, had a brain injury that caused him to, after 6 months in a coma, he was essentially had the mindset of a 2 or 3 year old, and needed a 24-hour around the clock someone there. That cost the family about $250,000 to $300,000. My stepfather, same thing, well, not different thing happened to him, but he became paralyzed from the waist down, and he was only lived for 1 year after that. But that was $4,000 a month just to have someone come in, even 3-4 days a week, to help my mom out. So extremely expensive. And as we live longer lives, this will eat away at many people's inheritances, and that really impacts any kind of a legacy that we can leave for our children. So let's just talk about a common sense way to do this, right? If we think about how hard it is to leave an inheritance, why don't we use the best asset that all of us have, which is time? And what if we could use an entire lifetime of time, from birth all the way to age 67, to be able to build something up for our children or our grandchildren, depending on our perspective here. So 3 simple money concepts of the $1 million baby, right? Number one, we've already talked about compound interest and how valuable that is, okay? And getting a better rate of return on our money. Number two, it's time value of money, which is this section. And then we're going to get into really protecting that wealth now, safeguarding this. And this is where, we have concepts that we utilize with trusts, because I know that if my kid is 18 years old and all of a sudden has access to money that I set aside for them, they're probably going to do something with an 18-year-old mind, which is to spend the money and do something that's not necessarily what it was intended for. So there's ways to put together a trust that is irrevocable until a certain age, and then be able to have the monies distributed at a later date. So that's where you start utilizing trusts, right? True meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit. So going back to that oak tree analogy. So could you save $1 million? Let's look at 2 different examples. Dana's example, then you have Hector's example. And both, I think you'll agree, are doable. And by the way, these are both hypothetical examples, okay? So no promise of any rate of return, anything like that, but just really common sense things here. So what if you could set aside in an account at birth $13,000 for each of your children? Or you had a grandparent, or you are a grandparent, and you could do that for your grandkids at birth. You could put $13,000 in an account that they cannot touch. That's the very important part, right? Until they're 67 years old. Well, just at 6.5% return, okay, which is well below averages over the last 100+ years, for example, of the U.S. stock market, just as an example, right? So not saying what vehicle we're using here, but 6.5% return, you have $1 million at 67, okay? What if you started though at 18? Okay, well, it takes you a little time to put it away, or your kids are they're already older than 0, okay? They're 18 years old, or they're a teenager. Well, if you gave them a $13,000 gift for graduating high school, well, at 67 years old, it would be worth a lot less, obviously, because we know the time value of money, the earlier we start. So instead of $1 million, it's $311,000. Still not bad, okay? Not $1 million, but still not bad. Or what happens if you don't have $13,000 though? What happens if you just need to start with something maybe more what Frank was talking about, that you can't, maybe you don't have a lump sum, maybe you need to put something away each month. Well, here's Hector's example. Hector started at birth with $2,500 for his son, and then saved $250 a month for the next 4 years, right? So that's $12,000. So they had to save a little bit more money. Instead of 13,000, it's 14,500, but the same result, because it was front loaded in the early part of his son's life. Or the same example, he started at 18. His son was a little older already. He said, you know what, now is the time. My son's graduating high school. Same concept, $2,500 down, $250 a month for 4 years, over $300,000 for 67. Could that make a difference? Could that make a difference? And just, according to United Nations, there's 250 children born in the world every minute. So imagine how different their lives would be if we created a plan. I love what Dana says, is that this would give children greater freedom to explore, fail, find their purpose. Because once we get beyond money, that's when you could really see what's possible. So many times we're so worried about money, so thinking about money, it just binds us up where we don't really act freely. And therefore we're not being true to ourselves a lot of times with our career choice, with who we are in the world. And that can actually make us a prisoner. So I think that this is something that just a concept here. How cool is it? If we could help our kids, and I think about, and by the way, before I close this part, we want to do what's best for our kids, right? I mean, now there's some that might say, hey, I had the school of hard knocks. I want my kids to have the school of hard knocks, and that's fine. That's just a different way to think. But I think most wealthy families and most people more of my affluent clients, what they're always thinking about is their legacy, what they can do better by their children. Still giving them the kind of the freedom to fail, but at the same time, but at the same time, really also knowing that they're a backstop for their kids, right? And so there's a lot of ways to accomplish this, and you could talk to one of our professionals that can certainly kind of guide you on this path. And even they say you got to put your own oxygen mask on first in an airplane before you help the kids, right? So we got to make sure our own situation's buttoned up too before we help our children. So to close this up, I hate to say here's how suckers think, but my kids will probably have to fend for themselves. They'll be lucky if I don't end up moving into their basement, right? And here's how the wealthy think. If there's an affordable way to set my kids up to be taken care of in their later years, my family and I are going to get it done. So that's my part. I'm going to pass the controls over to Angelo, who's going to close us out today. And Angelo has been a great partner of ours. He's been in business now for over 25 years, 3 beautiful children. He's been a mentor to me since coming in this business 22 years ago, and one of my best friends as well. You can't always say that in business, but a business partner and a great friend. Has multiple offices in the Chicagoland area. Has recently grown a location down in the St. Pete, Tampa Bay area, which I'm very jealous because it's so nice down there. But Angelo, why don't you close us out with today's class?
All right. Can you see my screen there, Todd?
I can.
All right, great. I'm just going to roll up here and wrap this up for all of you because I know we've been on for a little while and you've had a chance to hear a lot about different important concepts. And I think by now you've probably realized that you don't have to be an expert on trading stocks or an expert on understanding the real deep complexities of money, but really it all begins with understanding the important principles. And there are the 2 major principles that we really hit home today was, the power of compounding interest and the power of time. And the rule of 72, it's not a magic trick, but I first saw this in 1995 while a college student at Northern Illinois University. And when I saw this, I said, how is it possible that with a finance degree, no one in my class knows this, and I don't know this? How is it possible if someone who went to school for this doesn't know it? How could someone, a regular person out there, ever learn it? And so I really recognized that if you could understand this mental math shortcut, it would really tell you how long it takes for money to double at different interest rates. And so this is illustrated in a lot of simple ways. If right now is to go down and get about a 1% return on an account, and I wanted to figure out how long that 1% account it would take for the amount I contributed to double. It's real simple. One goes into 72 times. My money doubles every 72 years. But as you saw earlier from Frank and Shantae, there is a real big difference in interest rate, right? Because if my money is doubling at 1%, it takes 72 years. Now at 3%, although it's only a 2% increase, I've shrunk the amount of time to 24 years to double. It's 1/3 of the time, but I only increase my percent by 2. Then by increasing my percent another 3 points, it only takes me 24 years down to 12 years. That's 6%, 8%, at 9%, 8 years to double, and at 12%, 6 years to double. Now, again, we're not talking about any guaranteed situations at these interest rates, but what's the important principle to glean here is that we can certainly look in the past and figure out, hey, what did these vehicles average in the past? And we know it's not a guarantee into the future, but what we do know is at 1%, it's going to take 72 years, and at 3%, it's going to take 24 years. So just knowing that, we know we've got to do better, right? And so if you were to look at someone like Zoe, who got a $10,000 inheritance, and we started at almost like the same example as the $1 million baby, but starting at 19. And in this example, if she puts it at 1%, she's only roughly got about 16,000 at the retirement age on that 10,000. But just because she got 3%, just with a little bit of education, she gets 2 doubles on that 10,000. The double every 24 years to 40,000. But now it's 6%. Again, you can see the illustration. We're doubling every 12 years. So you're getting a double here, 4 doubles, because you're getting a double at 31, 43, 61, 67, right? And then when we move on, you look at the rest of it, you can see that if you could get up to 12% return, you can get about 8 doubles on this money. So that's significant. What about the 1% example? We talk about, is there an opportunity here? Well, man, this is what really opened my eyes. I was not really ever looking to become a financial educator. I wanted to work in corporate. I wanted to work at a desk and, tell people, analyze deals. And I just was kind of working behind a computer most of the day. But then I saw statistics back in 1996 that today haven't improved. In fact, the situation's gotten worse. 1%, is that really realistic? Well, there's $10 trillion that is in money market and passbook savings that are getting 0.09%. That's not 9%. That's 0.9%. So if you were to put that into the rule of 72, that's not a typo. It would take 800 years. It would be 2820. But we have literally $10 trillion of people's money, and that was before the crisis. I guess that happened during the crisis, some of it, but more money has gone into secure places because people are scared. So I would suspect, although I don't know, but I would suspect that that number has not gone down. It may have, in fact, even gone up, right? But look at this. Most of us use these credit cards, right? And the credit cards, the opposite is true. We're getting about 17% interest as the average credit card interest rate. Well, if you were to look at that, that means that my money on my credit card debt now is doubling every 4.2 years, but my savings that is, at the same bank probably, right? Because banks issue credit cards and they issue savings accounts. Maybe you got that 0.09, you got to wait 800 years to double your money, but when they borrow it to you, they can double their money in 4.2 years. It works against you the opposite way, right? And so, you look at this guy here from the book, he says, I don't know what unscrupulous means, but I know why banks give customers suckers, right? And one of the jokes I heard, and I know it applies at the bank I look at, what kind of sucker do you get from the bank? It's a specific brand, right? When you go to the bank, you always get a lollipop. My kids always ask for lollipops. I got to roll down the windows in the back seat because if they're tinted, they're not sure if anyone's back there. My kids will make me roll down the window so that they can get, the lollipops. But every time I look at the brand, and it's almost like a joke, they're called dum-dums, right? Because I don't know why, but it's kind of a weird coincidence, right? So the rule of 72, as I mentioned, it works the other way. It can help you divide by the number of years left to save that you have. So if you've got 15 or 20 years or 30 years or 20 years, you can figure out how long it would take for that money, the interest rate you would need to get that money you need during retirement. So here's an example. I have a $500,000 in a retirement account. I'm 57 years old. Are you saying if I want my money to double to 1 million by retirement, which is 10 years from now, I can divide it by 72 to get the interest rate? Precisely. So it would be at that age, you take the 72, you divide it by the interest rate. That means you need to get 7.2% interest rate on that money for 10 years on average in order to get to that $1 million amount. Now, obviously, you can apply any amounts to it, and we can help you understand that, right? And you know how suckers think, say, hey, man, this is getting long. I'm kind of bored. Is this an hour and 15 yet? This is boring, right? And we are almost done. I just have just a couple minutes left. But wealthy people, they see this information and they go, you know what? Math box. The rule of 72 is simple, powerful, and practical, right? I know my kids, they have to constantly be stimulated because of devices. And sometimes as adults, we have to constantly be stimulated. We have a hard time focusing on anything. We're always multitasking. And sometimes the most important and valuable lessons, whether it's about our health, about our wealth, or some other area of our life, we miss it because our mind is somewhere else. But, you know, wealthy people, they're always looking to learn. They're always reading books. They're trying to understand and get better at things, right? Because if you understand it, once you know how money works, you'll be able to ask questions like these, but you'll even be able to answer them, right? Is a bank account the best place to put my money? Am I willing to settle for 1% or even higher, or even 2% rate of return? Or is there a way I can get 4 or 6% or maybe even higher? What type of higher interest rates accounts also apply and give you safety? Can I finance or refinance my car loan at a lower interest rate? Is the financial institution that's managing my money, are they earning more interest than me? Right? Isn't that the problem? It's not like the bank's not earning interest, but because they're just taking your money and they're investing it. That's what they're doing, right? Well, I get enough doubles during my income earning years to reach my savings because, look, retirement may last as long as the years you work. You retire at 55 or 60 or even 65. Many people are going to live well past 90. You might work 30, 35 years and need as much money, you know, for another 30, 35 years. And that's really where the dilemma comes in. And so we really have, you know, a masterclass, that part 2, where we're going to fill this in. But right now, where we're going to give you a chance to fill this in is a person who invited you down. They'll give you an opportunity to kind of take it to the next level, because what we're going to talk about in our next meeting, which probably would be one-on-one at this point. I know we have a masterclass that's coming out here in the next week or two. But after today, you probably want to cover part 2, which is the 7 money milestones. And what we recommend you do is get back with the person who invited you on, or whoever gave you the How Money Works book. And what we will do is cover these last things. And this is the last thing I'm going to cover today. And what these 7 money milestones are is really a roadmap to your financial security. It's our process. Every person that works with our firm, every client that works with our firm, what we do is we take them through these 7 money milestones. And you know, the first one is obviously giving them a financial education, becoming literate on the most important principles. You don't have to know how to trade stocks. You just have to understand where to put it and where to get the right rates of return, and how to manage your own expectations and what you really are going to need to do. It's really about becoming a truthsayer to yourself and really owning up to where you are or where you're not, right? Number 2, and part of that process is making sure you've got protection in place. If you lose your income, what if you lost your savings? What impact would that have on you, or what impact would that have on your family and if you have, you know, children, if you have a spouse, right? If you have anyone else you're caring for. Number 3 is an emergency fund. You know, we're supposed to have 3 to 6 months of income set aside for unexpected expenses. Really, if you look back at COVID, when it's all said and done, in most places it would have lasted about 90 days or less, right? And if you look at it, if you had 3 to 6 months of living expenses set aside, even if your income was at 0 during this time, you would have enough money to cover your expenses. And that's what we recommend to people, is making sure, well, how do you do that? Where do you do that? You know, what's a smart place to do an emergency fund? Well, we can cover all the ins and outs of that in our next get together, right? Number 4 is debt management, understanding about our spending habits and the impact they have, and how can we really figure out the day that your debt's going to be eliminated. You know, a lot of people know their birthday. They might know the day that that they have a big trip coming up or their anniversary, but do you have a day that you're going to be debt free? Is there a day in your life where you know you're never going to owe anybody another cent again? That's an important day in many people's lives, but it never comes because they never set a date, right? They never have a plan to do it. We can help you to do that, right? Understanding how to manage your own cash flow, earning additional income. Many of us, we look at this. I certainly didn't look at this as something that I wanted to do. I looked at it as something I needed as education for me and my family. But once I uncovered, how many others needed it, and I also knew that it was a very lucrative industry. No one had to tell me the financial industry is lucrative. You know that just from living in this country, that the most strong people, many of them are in the financial industry. Some of the most financially affluent people, they come from this industry. So once I uncovered what was possible, it was a very intriguing industry for me to want to get started with. And I started part-time. And then within about 9-10 months after I started my full-time job, I was able to leave my full-time job and go full-time as a transition. I started moonlighting, and that's what a lot of people do. Most people start out moonlighting. We assign you to an expert, and that expert works with you until you feel like you want to become an expert, or they'll become the lead on your programs and give you a referral every time they help a family. There's a lot of ways you can do this, right? And we're really always looking to grow because there's a tremendous need for this education out there in the marketplace, right? And so really understanding how your expenses are, making sure you have enough money coming in if you don't have enough money coming in, and really, really having a budget. Number 6 is building wealth for the long term. We spent a lot of time on this today: compound interest, time value of money. And lastly, here we talk about protecting your wealth. And if we're going to protect your wealth, and we're going to do that, we believe that that's where you're going to need a will. You're going to need some basic documents. Many people feel that you need to have a lot of money in order to need a will, but in reality, if you ever need any healthcare decisions made, and you really want to dictate that and not have a judge dictate that, even having very little money, you want to have healthcare directives. You want to make sure at the end of your life, when you've worked so hard, is there a way to bypass the court system and give your hard-earned earnings to your family, right? And there's several strategies that we have in play, and I'm not going to have much more time today to discuss them in detail, but again, one strategy many people really love is, this is such an intriguing strategy. And this strategy really takes into place zero market risk for your money. It has long-term care built into it. It has tax-deferred growth built into it. It has tax-free income, and it has the potential to transfer tax-free as a legacy to your family. And so people ask me, well, how many strategies have all of these in them? Well, we know of at least one, right? And one that we do know of is available with some of the biggest companies that you see on TV today. Companies like Nationwide and companies like Transamerica have this strategy available, but many of us don't know. And in our follow-up, we'll get into the details with you and find out, is this a suitable strategy for you? Because it may not be, but for many people it is. And this could be our first very good path on your way to financial independence, is understanding how this works. And then really, as we conclude, probably the biggest thing you'll have to face in your life, an important thing to really dive into, is the impact of taxes. Taxes are something that is going to be a big problem. And we just watched our government spend several $1 trillion. We're up to $25 trillion now as a deficit. And many of us, as we progress through our life, we're saving our money. And if we were saving $10,000 at age 29, and we were earning a 9% annual return each year, we'd have $250,000 when we reach age 65. Now we have a question, right? Would we rather pay the taxes right now and the $10,000, and we know what our taxes will be? Your principal would be taxed, but you will be taxed at today's tax rate, right? Or you could pay no taxes today, like many people do in IRAs. They're tax advantaged up front. Traditional IRAs or traditional retirement accounts, 401ks, 403bs. These are accounts that are not taxed up front, but then what happens is you'll be taxed on all of it later. You'll be taxed on the entire 250, but you'll be taxed at whatever the tax rates are when you retire. Well, if you retire in the next year or two, that might be predictable. But the way that things are going, many of us are not going to retire for 20, 30, maybe even longer years. And we have no idea what the tax rates are, but historically they're pretty low. And there's a really good probability, in many people's opinion, that these tax rates will go up. So there's 3 ways you can be taxed. You pay taxes now on interest, earnings, and dividends every single year. You can pay taxes later when you start taking distributions in retirement, or you could just pay the taxes up front and never ever owe taxes again on earnings and distributions. These are the types of things that we really can dive deeper with you in our next appointment. And last thing for today is at the back of the book, or if you don't have a copy of this, this is a fact finder. It helps us do an inventory on your scenario. Just gives us a snapshot, doesn't have to be exact, but it kind of gives us an assessment, sort of the vital signs of your financial life. And then what we can do is we can explore now in detail, once we have a basic understanding of a discovery of where you're at, we can then help you from there create a starting point and a plan moving forward. So I'm excited that I've been able to share some time with you this afternoon. We're just about, we're right at the end of our time. I hope all of you had a chance to, really learn something this afternoon. And if you are intrigued by anything that you heard today, what I'd like to ask you to do is get back with the person that, gave you the book or invited you on today. And what they'll do is they'll get you the specifics on where to go from here, really on that part 2. And the best part about the part 2 is we'll be able to do it specifically for your scenario where we can really drill down and really put some numbers, because concepts are great. And it's, you can learn all the concepts in the world and feel really good about them. But the most important thing, I think, is that when you put your numbers into those concepts, and then you finally really look at cold hard reality of where you are and where you're not. And once you really, really know where you are and where you're not, that's the starting point to really being able to master how money works.